ourselves before we dive into our topic today. My name is Amber Kupina, and this is my giggling husband, Jesse Kupina.
Hi.
I am in the world of spiritual healing, and I work with shamanic practices. And throughout my journey, I have found a lot of healing in my relationship with myself, and my relationship with my family members and my friends, and then, of course, my significant other. And I use the philosophy of my healing background to allow me to have a more conscious relationship with my husband, to cultivate more love and connection with our relationship, and to have an easier time navigating the challenges that come with relationships. So that is what I do, and I'm excited to talk to you about the tools that we use in our relationship to help us have a conscious relationship. And I'll toss it over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Jesse Kupina. Of course, I'm Amber's husband. And as a full-time job, I own Central Social Hall here in Edmonton and St. Albert. And I've sort of streamed into some of Amber's work through the healing I've done with Amber and on my own. And now as a couple, we do some work under sort of Amber's brand as what we've done healing-wise as a couple, and what we do to navigate through difficult times, communication breakdowns, sort of that stuff that couples deal with. Now, where I am not a professional, I like to consider myself a highly rated amateur because I have had a number of failed relationships, and through my healing work and through the stuff I and we have done, I have a very successful one, and have a baby, new one. Well, we have a baby, and I'm extremely happy and fulfilled, and love where I'm at with my relationship. So I speak more from experience and growth, coming from a space of transformation. Thanks for finishing that sentence. See.
So we wanted to talk.
Shake the table.
We wanted to talk about communication and conflict, especially now during this time. We're spending way more time together, and
we as in everybody.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're at home with your partner more, you're working from home, if you have children, you're navigating homeschooling or taking care of your children while maintaining a job or your business, or adapting, or maybe you have no job and you're faced with a lot of fears coming to the forefront of your experience right now. And this can be really triggering in our relationships, because now we're spending a lot of time with each other and we have a lot of emotion coming up, and it might be easy to lash out on each other or get annoyed at each other or react. And we want to give you ways that we have found very useful in our relationship to navigate those and to come back to a space of love and connection. So is there anything else you wanted to add on that before we dive in?
No, I think you summarized it very well, my dear.
So when we're in relationships, it is natural to get triggered. It is natural to have something come up. And the first thing that we want to acknowledge in our relationships is that one thing that we found was very common in our relationships, and through my practice working with a lot of clients and their relationships and their so-called issues in their life, we hear the words that project blame onto others. So we blame people for making us angry. We blame people for, well, I'm trying to do this and you're doing that and you're not listening to me. And we get into a space of blame. And it's easy to do that because we're going into a trigger. And in these moments, we have an opportunity to become aware of our emotions, and that our partner or the person that we're spending a lot of time with has revealed that to us. So it gives us the ability to acknowledge our own behavior in the moment and our own emotions, and from there we can take a pause. Now, it's easy in our trigger times that we get triggered and we react right away, because as soon as a wound gets triggered, the first responses are to deny that we're in a wound, to get defensive, or even to attack back. So Jesse did this really great example when we did our conscious relationship seminar about how when you get into an argument with someone, and he put his hands out like this and he said, and I push you your hand, you're going to push back. And that's what we do in relationships is when you feel like I'm pushing you, you're going to push back a little bit. There's resistance there.
It's a human condition.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the hand represents. Sorry.
Yeah. It's a natural response that we go into because we get into an emotional state and we want to push back because when we feel a little bit vulnerable or we feel like we have been, even sometimes in the moment when someone calls you out on something, it can trigger your shame, it can trigger your embarrassment, it can trigger your emotions around your behavior, and you become very defensive and protective over your actions, and then you fight back. And this is where we tend to get into blaming the partner for how we're reacting and for how we're feeling. So in conscious relationships, we really own our behavior and our emotions. And this is where we can stop ourselves. So the first thing is noticing you get triggered. So if Jesse triggers me in the kitchen while I'm doing something, before I begin to react at him, I can acknowledge I'm angry. And I might even tell him that because we out the emotion, we out the thought, and it gives a little bit of space and a little bit of breathing room. And when we have that breathing room and that pause, we can make a different choice and follow a different path and behavior. So in the moment, we want to acknowledge our trigger and then pause, and that's where we have an opportunity to choose different. So I can choose a different way to engage with Jesse. Rather than getting mad at him, I can say, okay, I feel triggered right now, and my emotion that's coming up is anger. So I just want to let you know what I'm experiencing right now, and I know that has nothing to do with you. That's one of the biggest things in relationships is it actually has nothing to do with the other person. It has everything to do with what's already occurring inside of you, and the other person just revealed it to you. I'm going on. Feel free to interrupt me at any time.
Yeah, you're doing really well.
Thank
you. I think a couple things. I want to try and hit on a couple things that Amber said. First of all, I've said it before. If you've worked with us at any level, that a lot of people say relationships are 50-50. It's a common thing you always hear, and it's 50-50. But the problem with 50-50, why it doesn't work, is that one person's definition of 50. Where does that line? Trying to do my hands right. Where does the line fall? My 50 might be way short of actual 50. So what we've tried to adopt as a couple and in my own personal life is to be 100% accountable. But what that also means is being 100% accountable to your contribution to the conflict. So what Amber says is both very true. What I suffered from a lot in my arguments, in my arguing style, is that I would react and raise my voice. It must come from a wound that Amber and I can talk about another time. Maybe as a younger man or younger child, I wasn't heard, and I felt the only way for me to get my point across was to then say the same thing, but in a louder voice, which doesn't really get the point across any further. So right in that moment for me is when I find that when when a conflict happens, I find that right away I'm in that snapping zone. And so what I do in those moments is take acknowledgement of my action right there. I stop it as fast as I can. The minute I feel myself getting warm, I just stop and say, hey, listen, I'm sorry if I reacted that way. I own that, and let's bring it down and talk about what the conflict is. Mm-hmm. So that's a couple things where accountability is one for me that's really big, and then the second one is really just consciousness is very key in relationships, obviously, but in conflict, because what Amber's going to talk about a bit here is sort of the nervous system and how we react and how we don't even know what we're doing if we let ourselves get into an argument that goes into a level where your nervous system refuses to recognize sort of sensibility. So really acknowledging that being a part of that conflict, I think, is really important, and catching it before it gets into that spot. So.
Mm-hmm. So this is where we'll talk about the nervous system. So when we get triggered, it's very easy for our nervous system to go into fight or flight because we get into a state of stress. And when we're in a state of stress, we actually can't even access our logical thinking brain, our regulated state. We can't access our grounded version of ourselves. We're in fight or flight mode. And so when we get triggered, before it if we notice it fast enough, if we bring awareness fast enough, which is very difficult because our subconscious reacts, I think it's like 0.3 of a second before your automatic response kicks in. So we have very short periods of time to insert awareness. And when we have this awareness, in the moment, we can begin to take a deep breath to help our nervous system. Because otherwise, we're in fight or flight mode and we just go on the attack mode, we go on the defense mode. And then at some point, Jesse made a great example when we were talking this morning about what we were going to say today, is that have you ever been in an argument where you're getting so angry that all of a sudden you forget what you're talking about? You forget the point you're trying to get across, and that you're just trying so hard to be right that you don't even know what you're talking about anymore. That's because the nervous system has gone into fight or flight mode and we're not in our regulated state. So this is where, if you've read any books about the nervous system or any psychology about how we can regulate ourselves, we actually regulate better together. So in conflict, a lot of the times, I know that for me, Jesse's pattern was raise your voice. My pattern was shut down and go to the other room, like run away from it. And then I'm in the room spiraling in the emotion and the adrenaline that's occurring in my body and not actually resolving anything. So we now regulate together. So when something comes up, instead of him raising his voice and instead of me running away and hiding and becoming silent, we regulate together. So that might be taking a deep breath and acknowledging what's coming up for both of us. And then that way we can access the information that we have and the teachings that we have of being conscious, being aware, being acknowledging our emotions and our triggers, and being able to connect it to other times that we felt that way, rather than getting into the fight or flight and defense mode. And this is too where in our relationships we have an opportunity to look at what it is that we're seeking. And there is a philosophy that we're either seeking power or connection in our relationships. Now, power is when we get into a relationship or a situation or a trigger where we want to dominate, we want to control the other person, and we want to be right. We want them to see our perspective, and we won't stop until they do. We will defend and defend and defend and say the same thing over and over and over again, even though it's not getting through, to try and be right, rather than to connect with the person that is across from us. So this is where we look into connection. So connection is wanting to understand your partner. It's wanting to support your partner. It's wanting to empathize and perceive through their shoes what is occurring for them. And it's also willing to look at how your behavior could be impacting them, and taking, again, responsibility. So in these conflicts, are you seeking to be right and dominate and to control and to win the argument? Or are you looking to connect and actually resolve what's going on with your partner? They're two very different things. And when you bring awareness into your interactions with your partner, this is where you can have a huge self-reflection or a huge aha moment where you're like, man, I'm always trying to win with my partner. I always want them to see my point. And if they don't, then I'm going to go tell someone else about my point so that they can agree with me and they can affirm my opinion and belief and wound. And this doesn't resolve anything. It perpetuates a cycle. And when we're perpetuating a cycle, we're not getting anywhere. We are not growing. We are not evolving our relationship. We are in a self-fulfilling prophecy of reoccurring and recreating the same argument, the same fight, the same pattern over and over again with our loved one. So
and I'll just interject here, and from relationship to relationship. So you'll find that you can meet somebody new, things are going well, you go into this first quote unquote argument or conflict or disagreement, and it feels very, very familiar. Mm-hmm. And that's because, again, you've perpetuated this trigger and this reaction and this way of being that has actually nothing to do with the partner.
Yeah.
It has to do with you. And that's what the consciousness work it really does. Because none of this none of this work that Amber talks about, it's not in the sense that things are going to change or you're gonna quote unquote fix it. It's not that Amber and I don't have conflict. It's not that things doesn't arise. Where the consciousness really comes into play is your awareness and catching yourself and stopping the human nature aspects of our being from taking over our raw reaction in that moment. So those feelings of that argument, that your heart pounding, you're sweating, mm-hmm. whatever physiology happens to you when you get into conflict, it still may occur through these teachings and through Amber's work and through the work that you can do with your consciousness. But it's catching that awareness in that moment. And I use a simple example. I've used it 100 times. As I've said that, uh, everybody's obviously had a partner. Hopefully, some point in your life, you've been laying beside them at some point in the night after a massive argument, or you're still probably in the argument. You're just tired, so you're going to bed, and that you could just roll over and say you're sorry, and everything would be better. But we don't. Human nature, whatever it is, the way we were brought up, our wounds, our triggers, our whole life up until that moment has told us that we can't do that. We have to be right, and you're not going to say sorry till they do X, Y, and Z. So,
and too, the interesting thing is when you are committed to being right, are you happier? Is your relationship, like, are you happy the next day interacting with your partner? It doesn't actually fulfill anything. It's a false sense of righteousness, of pride. It's a false sense of what it's going to provide for you, because it doesn't actually give you anything other than it deteriorates the love and connection with your partner.
yeah, I heard somewhere something years ago that really stuck with me, really at the beginning of my healing journey and being the work I did. And someone just said to me, I stopped fighting with my wife. And I was like, oh, okay, that sounds, I was really intrigued. So I just immediately apologize. And from a unconscious state, I was curious as to where this was going. But he basically just alluded to the fact that he stopped because at the end of the day, he was coming from the human condition of trying to win. And he said, what do you win? You don't win money. You don't win a trophy. You don't win. All you win is you hurt the person you love the most or is there for you the most. That's what you quote unquote win in an argument. So that really, although it was really presented in a funny way, really kind of stuck with me. And I've carried that in my back pocket through all those times. And in those moments where you're like, well, what about this? Or I'm not going to say this till she does that or till he does this. Who cares? Like, where does holding on to that being right, where does that I'm so right, I
totally
should have done this or she should have done that, you carry that around with you. That doesn't affect anyone else but you. So yeah. It's really what the consciousness allows is a lot of freedom for you and your relationship.
Yeah, keeping score never works. And it doesn't provide any healing in our relationships. And I also want to acknowledge too that if you do get triggered and you do fall into your habitual state of reacting and fighting back, and then later you are aware of it, not to necessarily go and beat yourself up and to spiral out of shame that you fell into a habit. Rather, you now have awareness that in that moment you felt triggered and you reacted and it didn't actually serve and get the result that you were looking for. So now you have awareness that you didn't have before, and then that can help you in the next interaction. So it's not saying that at some point, or you should just know immediately and you should be able to do this right now when you get off this live. It's that throughout these experiences, we have an opportunity to use it as a form of growth and a form of awareness. Because when we don't follow the immediate protocol or tools that we can use right away, we now have an awareness that, I in the moment reacted, and next time I know I can take a deep breath before, or I can let them know what I'm feeling instead of blaming them for what I'm feeling. Yeah. And it's really empowering. Go ahead. Sorry,
I thought you were done. So one takeaway, I know we're coming up to 20 minutes here, so one takeaway from my perspective that you can try on is that like Amber said, even if you're outside of a conflict and you're now away from it, or you've gone your separate ways to cool off or whatever that may be, sort of take ownership of whatever you contributed to that conflict, and maybe just go back to your partner after a bit and just acknowledge what happened for you. Coming from a space of I is much more powerful than coming from a space of you. So when we have a conflict, and things are calm, I don't go back to Amber and say, yeah, but you did this and this, like you. I come back and say, hey, in that moment, I raised my voice and I'm sorry for doing that. And in that moment, this was occurring for me. And if there was a point I was trying to get across, great. And if there was something that she wanted to say, maybe it can be said then too. So going back to your partner after the fact and acknowledging, taking ownership of where you contributed to that conflict will spark them to do the same. And I think you'll see it come from there. So
absolutely.
that's 20 minutes.
That's 20 minutes. Over. So thank you for joining us to talk about how you can become more aware in your relationships and that it's always a journey. You're always growing into it. If you want to follow either of us on Instagram, I've tagged us. We use Instagram more so than Facebook.
I'm not on the Facebook.
Jesse Kupina. We also next week are doing a full hour of talking about tools and things that we do for staying conscious in our relationship. If you want to join us, you can check us out on Instagram and we will give you the information for that.
Want to have one plug? Hopefully Des and Mike let me plug. Central Social Hall has just launched today take-home Easter dinner. So basically it's turkey, ham, potatoes, pierogies, all the fun stuff. $25 a head. You can check it out on my Instagram. Check it out on Central Social Hall. You order it in, you pick it up. Easter dinner's done with some leftovers.
Wonderful. Thanks again, you guys. Enjoy your Friday.